Something unexpected was found in the fabric of the Shroud of Turin, not just surface marks or signs of age, but actual DNA embedded within the fibers. When scientists began analyzing it, they were not met with clarity or confirmation. Instead, the results complicated everything people thought they knew about the cloth.
102 scientific disciplines have studied the shroud and produced peer-reviewed journals, studies, and cases for all the different aspects. And when I tell you it's the most studied artifact in the world, I mean it. 102 academic disciplines have spent 600,000 scientific hours.
For many, the shroud has long been believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, a physical trace tied directly to the resurrection. Others have always rejected that idea, arguing it is a medieval creation designed to imitate something sacred. Over the centuries, theories have ranged widely, including claims that it may have been produced by a highly skilled artist, with some even linking it to figures like Leonardo da Vinci. Despite the range of opinions, the debate remained largely unchanged for hundreds of years, with both sides holding their ground. What changed in recent decades was not belief, but method. The shroud began to be studied using modern scientific tools rather than philosophical arguments. Researchers approached it as evidence, examining its fibers, stains, and structure in detail. Techniques from genetics, physics, and forensic science were applied, allowing the cloth to be analyzed at a level that had never been possible before. This included extracting genetic material, scanning the threads using imaging technologies, and breaking down the composition of the stains into measurable components. The expectation was that this would simplify the discussion. If the cloth were authentic, the biological material might point toward a single individual. If it were fabricated, there would likely be traces of pigments or processes consistent with medieval techniques. Instead, the findings did not align with either outcome. Studies conducted by researchers, including teams associated with the University of Padua, produced data that did not support a straightforward explanation.
What kind of testing has been done, scientific testing?
That is such a great question. This is where I went from being a shroud skeptic, because I was conditioned in Oxford in my residency that we deny miracles, we deny anything supernatural. Oxford is really a factory for creating apostate Bible scholars.
Rather than confirming a single origin, the genetic material appeared more complex. It did not behave like residue left behind by one individual, and it did not clearly match what would be expected from an artificial creation either. This shifted the focus of the investigation. The cloth was no longer being treated simply as an object to authenticate or dismiss, but as something that recorded information in ways that were not immediately understood. The real turning point came long before any DNA studies. In 1898, during an exhibition in Turin, a photographer named Secondo Pia was given permission to photograph the shroud. Back then, photography was slow and careful work. You set everything up and you waited. The results only appeared later, in the dark room, alone. That night, when Pia developed his plates, something made him stop. The negative did not distort the face the way negatives usually do. It made it clearer. What had looked faint and uncertain on the cloth became detailed and recognizable. A face emerged. Not a suggestion of one, an actual human face. That moment changed how people talked about the shroud. When you photograph a painting, the negative makes it look flatter and stranger, less real. This went the other way. The image became more defined, more alive in the negative than it ever was on the cloth itself. That was not supposed to happen, and the strangeness did not stop there. The image does not sit on the fabric the way paint does. It only touches the very surface of the fibers without going any deeper. When scientists examined it using X-ray and infrared imaging, it kept behaving in ways that normal artistic methods could not explain. It did not look made. It looked like something that had simply occurred. But the deeper investigation did not focus only on the image. What started to matter more was everything else attached to it. The particles are trapped inside the fabric. Dust, pollen, and microscopic fragments had settled into the threads over time. These are the kinds of things that accumulate slowly, almost invisibly, and once embedded, they can remain there for centuries.
NEA Laboratories said this 34,000 trillion watts of energy traveled in 1/40th of a billionth of a second to leave the image on the shroud. Otherwise, it would have scorched the image and destroyed it. And the image is just 2 or 3 microns thin. It disappears if you go closer than 8 feet.
In 2015, a research team led by Professor Giulio Fanti at the University of Padua carried out one of the most detailed biological analyses of the cloth. Their goal was not to prove a religious claim or disprove one. It was more practical than that. They wanted to understand where the cloth had been and who had come into contact with it over time. To do this, they used highly controlled methods to collect microscopic material from the fabric. Special vacuum devices with fine filters were used to pull particles not just from the surface, but from deep within the weave, where older traces are more likely to remain protected. They also examined material that had been collected and preserved during earlier restoration work. This kind of analysis is extremely sensitive. Even the smallest modern contamination can distort the results. A single touch, a breath, or a fragment of skin can introduce new DNA that mixes with older material. Because of that, the samples had to be handled in controlled laboratory conditions before sequencing began. What they expected was something relatively straightforward. If the cloth originated in medieval Europe, the genetic traces would mostly reflect that region. If it had remained in the Middle East, the results would point there instead, but the outcome did not match either expectation. Instead of a clear origin, the genetic data showed traces from multiple regions. Middle Eastern markers were present. So were European ones, which made sense given the cloth's long journey through history. Researchers stopped asking where it was made and started asking where it had been. The distribution was not random. It followed patterns that mapped onto known historical routes, suggesting the cloth had passed through many hands long before it settled in Europe. When scientists examined the blood, they confirmed it was real human blood, type AB, rare but not unheard of on ancient relics. What stood out was what the blood contained. The chemical markers pointed to severe physical trauma, the kind that only appears when a body has been pushed far beyond its limits over a prolonged period. This was not someone who died quickly. The blood also remained red, which is unusual for something so old. Analysis showed high levels of compounds released during extreme stress, which can slow that darkening process. Again, nothing symbolic, just biology, consistent with enormous suffering. The 1988 carbon dating seemed to settle things, placing the cloth in the medieval period. But later researchers found the sample had been taken from a corner that was heavily handled and repaired. It was not original material. Cotton fibers were found there, while the rest of the cloth is linen. The test had likely measured a patch, not the shroud itself. Newer methods focused on the aging of the linen directly and pointed to a much earlier origin somewhere around the 1st century. Not a definitive answer, but enough to reopen what many believed was a closed question. The image itself remains unexplained. There are no brush strokes, no pigment, and the mark only touches the outermost layer of the fibers. It behaves like a chemical change rather than something applied. Experiments suggest only a brief and intense burst of energy could produce something similar. Nothing from that period, or since, fully accounts for it. So when everything is put together, the result is not a clear conclusion, but something more difficult to resolve. The cloth does not behave like a typical artifact. It carries biological, chemical, and physical features that each